What should we do if we want to avoid flipping into a more regular problem? Ironically, the answer is really nothing. And what I mean by that is try not to worry about it. Sleep disruption because of stress is really normal, and most people's bodies deal just fine with that and get back to their normal place. Try to carry on doing your day-to-day activities as you would. Try to just go about sleep in the same way you usually would as well. Ideally avoiding lying in too much or napping for long periods or going to bed early, all of which can reduce the sleep pressure that we have at the point of going to sleep and make it harder to sleep.
Welcome to the Choice Space podcast. I'm Dr. Lee David, GP, CBT therapist and author. And after our recent episode on sleep in babies and families, today we're shifting to what happens when sleep is hard in adults. Around 3 in 10 people live with ongoing sleep difficulties that affect much more than tiredness. They influence mood, focus, energy, how we live our lives, and how we connect with our friends and family. When nights are broken, it's easy to feel caught between exhaustion and frustration, wondering why something so natural can feel so difficult. But change is possible. Sleep can improve. Cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, or CBT-i, is the most effective treatment for long-term sleep problems. It helps us understand how our daily thoughts, habits and patterns affect our nights, and how easing pressure and making small, consistent changes can help the body find its natural rhythm again. Today, I'm joined by Louise Berger, occupational therapist and CBT-i specialist, to explore what genuinely supports better sleep, from the ways our minds and routines influence rest to the practical steps that can help break the cycle of sleeplessness. Louise, welcome. Could you introduce yourself and share what drew you to focus your work on sleep?
Hello, Lee. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'm just delighted to be here today. And I really hope this is going to be really helpful for many of your listeners. I'm an occupational therapist by background, but around 13 years ago, I was invited into the sleep clinic at the Royal Surrey County Hospital to establish an insomnia service. And essentially, the sleep clinic at that time was largely treating people with sleep breathing disorders, so sleep apnea. And they just found that a lot of the people they were seeing also had insomnia, as in difficulty falling asleep or getting back to sleep, or they didn't have sleep apnea at all. They had insomnia. And at that time, the best they could do for them was give them a handout on sleep hygiene, which is not a particularly effective solution. So I got invited in. It was a massive learning curve. And I have to say, I haven't looked back since. Absolutely love being in the sleep world. I love seeing the transformation in people when a problem that has been around for such a long time is improved or resolved. And yeah, it's a really rewarding place to work.
Brilliant. And I'm really interested in what you said there, because as a GP, I often see people who have had really long-standing sleep problems, and they can become very frustrated, and it can really start to influence people's lives in such negative ways. So let's maybe start with a message of hope. Is that really possible to change?
Yes, often. And we see it regularly. And if you look at the feedback for the Royal Surrey Hospital regarding the insomnia clinic, you'll actually be able to read it from people that have been able to change their sleep. It's just really, really sad that often it takes people so long to get the right help. It might be that people think, I've just got to get on with it or put up with it. So they don't necessarily know that they can seek out support. And that is very much dependent on what the sleep issue is. We want to establish what's going on and then providing the right support, the right treatment for that condition.
So there's something about first understanding what's happening for somebody as an individual and then tailoring that advice to that individual. Can you tell us a bit about sleep? Let's start with the basics. Why do we even need sleep? And then what happens when we don't get enough of it?
Yeah, so it is a great question. And I think it would be far quicker to answer if we were saying, what don't we need sleep for? Because sleep is just so fundamental to our quality of life, but also our health, physical health, mental health, and cognitive health, as in brain function. And, it's the ultimate recovery tool. We spend around a third of our lives sleeping. And so in terms of physical health, we release growth hormone while we are sleeping. So that is helping to replenish our cells, repair, build muscle tissue, bone tissue. Children, of course, grow as they release growth hormone, but also boosting the immune system so that we're not so vulnerable to getting sick all the time. In terms of cognitive performance, sleep is vital for memory consolidation. And we know that the brain is doing a cleaning process overnight where it's getting rid of many of the toxins that have built up during the day. And then from an emotional perspective, I think most of us are quite familiar with how everything just feels so frustrating and miserable when we haven't had enough sleep. So sleep is really, really vital for our emotional regulation, our ability to cope with stresses and manage our emotions, essentially.
So there's a huge amount there that sleep has value, and that can also cause anxiety about not getting enough sleep. Do you think that can sometimes create a tension that makes things more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually very, very rarely talk to people about what the benefits of sleep are or what the downsides of not sleeping are, because in most of the people I'm seeing, they know that sleep is important. They feel it in their lives, the fact that they're not sleeping well. And that message around needing to sleep more or needing to sleep better, all that is doing is creating anxiety and creating a target that they feel like they are trying to achieve, but they can't. And this is one of the challenges, I think, around messaging for people who are struggling with their sleep. That's the last thing that they want and need to hear, because that anxiety is going to make sleep more difficult, not easier.
So there's something there about relaxing the expectations a little bit and not pressurizing ourselves. Sometimes I think people have an expectation that they should be able to rigidly control how much they sleep and get a certain number of hours every day. And it strikes me that that is actually quite hard to achieve in the real world, because I always say to people that you can create the conditions for sleep, but you can never force yourself to sleep. It's something that will be more likely to come if you create these positive conditions, but you have to allow it to come in its own time.
Yeah, absolutely. We can give ourselves the opportunity for sleep, but we can't will ourselves or force ourselves to fall asleep. We can't make ourselves get back to sleep. There aren't any magic wands that are suddenly going to create amazing sleep. And the reality is that not everybody needs the same amount of sleep. There isn't one amount that is perfect for everybody. And we hear a lot about how long people should be sleeping for, but really how long we sleep is just one component of sleep. That's the duration, but there are also other components that are important, like the quality of the sleep, the timing, the regularity, which all combine to create sleep which is doing what it needs to do.
So what do you mean by quality of sleep? What does that actually mean in real terms, do you think?
For most people, and what I'm referring to is whether that person is falling asleep quite quickly, getting long chunks of sleep, not really fragmented sleep, and feeling fairly well at the point of waking, or certainly fairly soon after waking. So it's partly about our sleep efficiency, how much time we're sleeping versus in bed, and whether it's feeling like a fairly easy process and whether it's restoring us as we would expect.
Right. So an efficiency is really about how much time in bed is asleep versus how much time in bed is spent doing other things, scrolling on our phones, lying there, wishing we're asleep, feeling irritated, all the things that we might do when we're not asleep and we're actually in bed.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess there is an element of sleep quality also being about, are we going through those sleep stages of light sleep, deep sleep, rapid eye movement in the way that would be considered fairly typical for a healthy adult? That said, there's no set standard that people have to have. Consolidation and continuity are usually important factors in sleep quality, and our sleep cycles go in round about 90 to 110 minute cycles, and it's not uncommon to wake up after a sleep cycle. Most people aren't aware of that, and it might be that they don't even remember it, so they have the sense of I slept the whole night, but many people will remember it. So it's not uncommon for somebody to wake 3-4 times a night, and assuming that's not a long wake, then we'd probably consider that within the normal range. But if somebody was waking maybe 10, 20 times a night, even if it's only briefly, that would be somewhat unusual. And that sounds like quite fragmented sleep, which they may well also notice has the impact of making them feel pretty tired or exhausted or sleepy during the day.
So it's normal to wake up in between those sleep cycles for short periods. And so not getting worried about that is also important, because in fact, if I get anxious about it, it probably makes it longer rather than just that natural dropping back to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people have the false expectation they should be able to sleep solidly. And they've taken that to mean that they shouldn't wake at all. And just the fact that they believe that they should be sleeping without waking means that the moment they wake up, the first thought is, oh no, I'm awake. Why am I awake? This isn't fair. Or what am I doing wrong? Or whatever it might be. Essentially, that stress system is being activated, which then unfortunately makes it harder to get back to sleep, versus a person who might just think, well, never mind. And I would often encourage to try and reframe that as thank you, body, for keeping me safe. I can confirm no saber-toothed tigers in my bedroom. I am happy to return to sleep when you're ready for me to return to sleep. Because it just understanding it's probably our body being helpful. We're very, very vulnerable as we sleep, and it might not have been successful for our caveman ancestors just to be unconscious solidly for 6, 7, 8 hours in a row. Whereas the changes in sleep cycles and these brief moments of awakening, they give us a real chance to check that we are in a safe place to be able to continue sleeping. So it's probably just our body trying to be helpful. Just doesn't always feel that helpful at the time.
That's really interesting. I think there's research that shows that CBT for insomnia is effective for people with sleep problems that are secondary to other physical problems that might wake them up. So that might be waking up at night to go to the loo, or pain, or menopausal symptoms, maybe having hot flushes. It's perhaps about not getting worried about those wakings and about not activating the threat system, which then makes us wakeful for a prolonged period, but standing it down, saying, thank you, yes, I'm awake, yes, I'll deal with this particular thing, and then I'm going to carry on sleeping afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that CBT for insomnia, which is actually quite different to a traditional CBT for maybe anxiety or depression, is almost universally effective, irrespective of age group or any associated condition that may be going alongside it. And it's been tried and tested scientifically in many, many different conditions, and we find that it is very helpful. And that's because almost with any condition, there's going to be that layer of how you react to the situation, which feeds into either helping you to glide through, or meaning that your body jumps into a stress state, and then of course it takes a while to get back to a point of relaxation and finding you can get back to sleep.
So, Louise, could you tell us a little bit about CBT for insomnia, CBT-i, and what it involves?
Yes, I would love to, because not many people really know about CBT-i, and that includes often medical professionals. So it is a non-drug approach which involves multiple components to address the factors that keep people stuck in that place of having bad sleep again and again. So it tends to include various techniques. So stimulus control is helping the brain to reassociate the bed with sleep, because when we're in bed for long periods of time, not sleeping, often stressing, tossing and turning, then actually our brain can get a bit confused about what it's meant to do in bed, and recreate this feeling of alertness and arousal at the point of bedtime, or maybe when we wake in the middle of the night. It's why people say my sleep problem started when ... But I'm over that now and I just can't sleep well. Essentially, it's become a habit. Another component of CBT for insomnia would be scheduling. So often when people aren't sleeping well and they have insomnia, there's a big mismatch between the amount of time that they're in bed versus the amount of time they're sleeping. And because this keeps on repeating, it just reinforces the problem. So we know that by getting people to spend a bit longer awake and a bit less time in bed, we can very often squeeze out the gaps. It's like if we've got a pizza dough and it's only designed for a 6-inch base, but we're spreading it over an 8-inch base, actually some gaps and thin patches will appear. That's a bit like, you're only able to sleep 6 hours, but you're in bed for 8 hours. And the way to get that pizza dough in a place where it's actually usable and it's good quality would be to squish it back down to that 6-inch base. So scheduling is certainly one really powerful component that can often turn sleep around in literally a matter of 1 to 3 weeks, which is quite remarkable. And a lot of people would turn around and say, I can't believe I never knew about these things. I've had 20 years of difficulty, and a month later, everything is shifting. Other components would be relaxation exercises. Essentially, we want to give a person ways to calm and soothe their body and their mind. There would be cognitive approaches as well. So that's more around taming those troubling thoughts, or calming the mind down, slowing it down using various techniques. And the other element would be more around psychoeducation and helping people to understand how sleep works, the systems that regulate sleep, and also to become aware of whether there's any expectations they have around sleep which are really unrealistic, helping people to understand those. Also, sleep hygiene would come into that. And actually, sleep hygiene is not a solution if you have regular difficulty falling and staying asleep, as in insomnia. So CBT for insomnia goes well beyond sleep hygiene. And I just want to make that really clear, because it has so much science and evidence behind it as being very effective for many different groups of people and ages of people.
If someone is having long-standing challenges with sleep and they have developed insomnia, CBT-i is a really important evidence-based approach, and actually it is about accessing that through a sleep clinic such as yours to reset the sleep problems. It's not just a question of changing your sleep routines. It's going to involve more than that.
Yeah, and often we're doing multiple different approaches at the same time. When people try to implement advice that they've heard, often they're really, really desperate for an answer and a solution, and try something for a night or two and then think, oh no, this isn't working. But at the same time, consistency is really key to maintaining those changes over a period of time. And in terms of access, and it is a really important point, because there isn't the amount of access that I would want there to be. The main sources of access would be through a digital app. So Sleepio and Sleep Station are commissioned in certain areas of the country on the NHS, and they both have very good evidence behind them as being effective. Therapist-led CBT-i is available, certainly from our clinic at the Royal Surrey. There are a few other NHS clinics providing it, and I believe that some of the talking therapy services will also do CBT for insomnia. But we do need to increase access, get more people trained.
Are there any common myths that we haven't talked about that you often hear in your clinics that are unhelpful for people who are struggling with sleep?
One, I guess, is the assumption that all fatigue is because of sleep. So if you're tired during the day, that it must be that there's a problem with sleep. Now, of course, it's incredibly wise to start by asking yourself the question, how is my sleep? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting regular sleep? Am I getting sufficiently consolidated sleep? But there are a lot of factors that contribute to tiredness during the day, and it's not necessarily a sleep problem. Another myth seems to be that blue light in the evening has this colossal impact on our sleep. And the most recent evidence that's coming through, certainly from Gradazar and his amazing meta-analysis and his reviews, seems to be that while light is definitely an important factor to consider in the evening, melatonin, which is that hormone that tells our body when we should be sleeping, that is a hormone of darkness, and it is produced a couple of hours before we usually sleep. So if we're in a really high light context, then that is not helpful for our body clock regulating those important processes, which very much include sleep. But actually, the idea that the blue light from screens is going to delay sleep seems to be being debunked. And actually, there's a complex array of factors which contribute to why screens might result in slightly later sleep. One of them is simply that people like being on them. And it's very easy with the way things like Netflix or Facebook are set up that you just keep on going and don't stop. But that's not so much causing a problem getting to sleep. It's more that somebody defers their bedtime.
That's really interesting. One of the mantras I think that you see in a lot of sleep hygiene advice is about blue light. I think for me, what I have seen around screens is a lot around what content is being engaged with at bedtime, and that has a bigger impact on sleep than the light itself. So if, for example, people are trying to read a book on their phone, but they keep getting a notification from social media, or worse still, they get emails from work coming through and they start reading those late at night, or they're looking at the news and actually there's a lot of threat system activation because they're worried about war or politics or global problems, and make us feel quite alert and agitated at bedtime.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's what the evidence is pointing to now. It's more the interaction we're having with those devices and the impact that is having on us and on our behavior. So for some people, I can't get to sleep unless I have watched something beforehand or unless I'm listening to something. I very much hear that within the neurodiverse community, that often they find silence or even the idea of winding down and reading a book, it's really difficult for them to be able to do that and feel that that is the right thing for them. So probably the bottom line is we need to understand ourselves and know what is helpful to us or what isn't. And if we are using a screen, by all means, dim the brightness on your device. We can do that quite easily now. Equally, make sure that you're in a room with fairly low lighting. You don't want to be blasting yourself with light right up to the bedtime. Equally, we shouldn't necessarily believe that blue light from screens is the be all and end all, because the science doesn't seem to support that conclusion.
So if it is that it's hard to come off, I just watch another episode, I can't quite tear myself away, then we might need to set some kind of timer or really try to be clear with ourselves about when the end point is. But if it is about being activated by notifications or being on a phone where there's a temptation to go to a different app that might be more activating, then it might be choosing which device we pick up at bedtime, because you could have one that doesn't have all those things on it, and that then can be much less problematic. So I think we need to be quite thoughtful and creative, look at the individual, how does it help me, how does it cause problems, and what do I need to do that actually will create some space and allow me to wind down. So it's very individual, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if we plan it ahead, technology can help us with that. So there are apps now where you can select which apps you have access to at what time of day. So if you know come evening you're going to be tempted, but you feel like you want to be a little more disciplined about it, you can set your phone up or your device up so that it goes into do not disturb mode or whatever it might be. So if we think creatively about it, often we can use the technology to support us.
This is the Choice Pause, a short 2 to 3 minute tool you'll hear in every episode. Each time with something different to help you pause, notice, and choose your next step. Today's pause is creating space for rest. Take a steady breath in and a longer breath out. Let go of any tension in your face, shoulders, or jaw. Rest isn't only something that happens at night. It can also be found in moments like this, when the mind softens and the body begins to release tension, even for just a few seconds. Take a moment to give yourself permission to slow down and recharge. You don't need to fix or change anything. Simply allow a little more space for ease and recovery. Take another breath in and just let it out slowly, letting tension release. Now ask yourself, what small choice could bring a sense of rest into your day? Maybe it's relaxing your shoulders, pausing between tasks, or stepping away from the screen for a short break. When we create these small spaces for rest, the body begins to recognise calm and safety again. And these same foundations can help sleep come more naturally at night. Take a final slow breath and let it out really slowly. And carry that sense of space and allowing permission for rest into the rest of your day. A lot of people that I see would be troubled by worries at night, or by thinking and planning at night, being quite mentally active with lots going through the mind. And once they might wake up, then those thoughts show up and I find it really hard. And then I'm just awake for ages afterwards. Why is that such a problem? And what are your thoughts about how we might approach that?
Yeah, so it's a really common problem. And I think now with our busy lives, we're not getting much time to wind down or offload during the day. And then our mind is very busy overnight. And then the process is made worse by the way the brain works overnight. So during the day, we have our prefrontal cortex, that area behind our forehead, which is responsible for problem solving, rationalizing, controlling impulses, and even urging us to do things that we know are good for us rather than just pleasurable. And that part of the brain is interacting with the amygdala. That's the emotional center or the emotional alarm system. And it's helping to balance it out. So when we have the thought, oh, I'm so angry, I just want to shout at that person, our prefrontal cortex will step in and just remind us, hang on a minute, Louise, remember last time you did that, it didn't go so well. Just pause for a bit. Whereas at nighttime, our prefrontal cortex is essentially down-regulated. It's going offline. It's having a little snooze. And that means that we get all the sensitivity and noise and emotion coming from the amygdala, but we haven't got our prefrontal cortex there to step in and to help us to be able to think those things through and to realize, don't worry, there's going to be a solution for this. We'll be able to deal with it, to help us manage those emotions. So it means that when we're thinking about things in the middle of the night, they often tend to be really highly emotionally charged. And we can be duped into believing that they reflect reality. So just know when you're having those worries in the middle of the night, it's probably not as bad as it feels like it is. Your brain's giving you a false perspective, and these things are not as true or real as they feel like they are.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So it's just recognizing that my mind is not my friend at night, perhaps, especially when it's gone into worry mode. And my prefrontal cortex it's actually gone to sleep. At least part of my brain is sleep. So when it comes to worry, we need to just let go of believing all the content. So I would sometimes do with people something like worry time. We allow some time during the day to think about, and I sometimes call it thinking time, to schedule some time for those thoughts to air them. Yeah, I would often say around 20 minutes or so, have a timer at the end and then do something positive. Don't do it just before bed. And then at night, I might give people a recommendation to keep something by their bed, like a pad of paper, so that if they have a thought that they're worried about, you just jot it down and then say to yourself, well, I'm going to address that tomorrow when I come back to my thinking time or my worry time. And at that point, you've got your prefrontal cortex to help. So you might be more able to address it helpfully. Is that similar to what you might do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been researched quite extensively in the context of insomnia as well as anxiety, and it can be hugely helpful. So allowing your mind time to tell you what it's bothered about. And I think worry time, or a daily download, I might call it that, is a bit like our brain is trying to bother us with all these thoughts and feelings that often we don't want to engage with because they're not very pleasant during the day. And actually, if it knows it's got a time when it can do that and it's going to be a safe space, then actually that can be hugely helpful over the course of the day, but also at night in just slowing things down, or meaning we get less coming up and interrupting our night. 20 minutes, whatever works for a person. And I usually use a little algorithm to help them work through some of those thoughts afterwards.
So what kind of things would you ask them to do?
Ask them to put themselves in a safe place where they can just slow down and rest and know they're not going to be interrupted, and to write down anything that's coming up in their mind, just a couple of words to reflect that. And it would be a combination probably of things that really matter and bother them, like I've got to do a big presentation or a difficult conversation and I need to put bananas on the shopping list. Once they've got to a point, maybe after 10, 15 minutes, where it seems like nothing more is coming up, then at that point to go look at the list and just briefly ask themselves, is there anything I can do about this? We often ruminate on things we don't have any control over or even any influence over. And if that is the case, it's going to lead to us feeling quite uncomfortable or helpless or miserable. So the first thing is to acknowledge, no, there isn't. And if there isn't, I just ask them to take that caring hand they use to show love and care to other people and just put it on their chest and say, yeah, this is tough, but there's nothing I can do about it. And I give myself permission to let go of thinking about this. If they can do something, then the next question is, could I get that next step done in 3 minutes? So bananas on the shopping list becomes the next thing you're going to do. But if it's planning something big, then maybe not. So the next question would be, where can I capture this as an action? Where can I capture that next step? And it might be writing on a to-do list or putting on a calendar, emailing yourself. So when you get into work, that appears there in front of you and you don't have to think about it. Because when we write things down, when we confront those worries that we've often been trying to ignore because they make us feel uncomfortable, it's very calming for the nervous system to know that they're dealt with. And fingers crossed, they will be less likely to come overnight.
It sounds like there's a combination there of labeling, recognizing this is something that's on my mind, and giving ourselves permission to let it go if it's not something I have some power to control at this moment, and being kind to ourselves. I like that hand on the heart and compassion. And then there's something also about taking an action if we can. And I really like the shopping list thing, because I do think people often get woken up by their mind saying, don't forget to do this and don't forget to do that. And so it will just keep saying it. Like, it's like poking somebody over and over and over. I really don't want you to forget this. And so if we have made a note of it, then we can say, yes, that's all right. That's on the list. And so actually then there's no need to keep going over and over it because it's been validated. Yes, I hear you. That's important. We've got it.
I see that our mind is a clown in the circus, and it's got all the balls and juggling them and just trying to keep them going really quickly. And we write something down and it's like we're casting away one of the balls, so it can just slow down a little.
Brilliant. And I wanted to talk a little bit about stress and sleep, because we know that when people are stressed, sleep sometimes gets disrupted because we've got more stuff to worry about. Things are happening, genuine problems in life. And sometimes that might be a little bit inevitable, that sleep's not going to be as great in the short term. But what we really want to avoid, I think, is for that to become a long-term issue where sleep then gets disrupted more permanently after being triggered by a period of stress. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that relationship between stress and sleep, and then recovery afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we cannot live a life without stress. And certainly we know that around 30% of people at least will experience a period of sleep disruption due to stress over the course of any year. So stress does compete with our sleep pressure. It's trying to keep us awake a little bit longer so that we can resolve the problem or the danger, as our brain sees it, and get ourselves to a safe space before we go to sleep. So it's really, really common when we are stressed to find that it becomes harder to fall asleep, or that we wake in the night, we're awake longer, or even just that our sleep feels lighter and more fragmented. But like you say, we don't really want that to then evolve into a regular problem with our sleep. Most people, their sleep will go back to baseline, either as their body adapts or as the stressor resolves. When we question what's going on in that group of people who have had some sort of sleep disruption due to stress, and then months later they're still experiencing a sleep problem, but often that stressor is long gone. When we look at them, we see that there are often some common features in what's happened. And I'm drawing on Spielman's 3Ps model here, where he talks about people often having risk factors, as in predisposing factors that might make them vulnerable to a sleep issue. But then there's this precipitating event, so a trigger, that would be the stress event. Most people's sleep goes back to normal, but for some, these perpetuating problems come in, which then mean that the sleep problem sticks around. And the perpetuating factors are essentially how we are reacting to that sleep disruption. So it's normal when we're not sleeping well to start trying really hard to sleep. We might start researching it. We might start thinking about it during the day. We anticipate sleep at night and might be feeling a little bit anxious, thinking, will I sleep tonight? Won't I sleep tonight? We start to worry about it. So all of these factors in how we think about sleep then fuel our behavior, and sometimes people might start going to bed extra early thinking, if I just get into bed early, I'll maximize my opportunity for sleep and surely I will sleep well. But if they're getting in bed before their body is ready to sleep, then actually they probably won't sleep. They'll end up lying in bed awake or falling asleep, but not getting the whole way through the night, which then becomes a pattern. Some people might start cutting back on their daily activities, like, oh, I'm not going to go out and socialize tonight, or I'm so exhausted, I'm just not going to do my exercise. But often that withdrawing from these usual daytime activities that give meaning to our life and to help to use our energy and give us a sense of self-worth and connection, all of those things, we are doing fewer of the things that are really, really valuable and important for sleep. So to get to your initial question, what should we do if we want to avoid that process of flipping into a more regular problem? Ironically, the answer is really nothing. And what I mean by that is try not to worry about it. Sleep disruption because of stress is really normal, and most people's bodies deal just fine with that and get back to their normal place. Try to carry on doing your day-to-day activities as you would. Try to just go about sleep in the same way you usually would as well. Ideally avoiding lying in too much or napping for long periods or going to bed early, all of which can reduce the sleep pressure that we have at the point of going to sleep and make it harder to sleep.
So it's important to keep a regular routine and not to change it because of stress or changes, but try and just stick with what has been working in the longer term, perhaps, and make sure we don't stop doing the things we really care about, make sure that life carries on and that we're doing the stuff that makes life have meaning and purpose. Otherwise, we can start becoming quite flat or anxious and low, which I'm sure doesn't help sleep at all.
I guess with keeping the routine the same, I would put the caveat on that. If you feel like you've only slept a few hours and you've got to do a long drive and it's going to have a potential impact on your safety, then of course, take a nap, have a lie-in. But if you feel you can, try and stick to the usual wake time. Try not to catch up too much on sleep, and you're going to be able to do those essential activities without it being safety critical. Then that can often be helpful because then we're building up that sleep pressure for the nighttime, and that's when you really want to be sleeping.
We hear a lot about sleep tracker devices. A lot of people come in saying, oh, my sleep tracker tells me this, it tells me that, I've had this number of hours of this kind of sleep. Are those accurate? And do you think that they help people to improve their sleep?
Yeah, so it's a really, really good question. And I think who they're most useful for depends on what somebody wants to get from it. So for those people who maybe are sleeping quite well and maybe they're really looking to optimize their health, maybe athletes, for example, then they may be able to use a tracker to keep track of when are they in bed? Do they have a regular routine? Is there anything very obvious which is disrupting their sleep qualities? But for a lot of people, the trackers can become a source of anxiety. And the trackers don't offer us any solutions. They just offer us some information. It's not like they tell us how to fix any problems if we have them. And then on top of that, the trackers are not completely accurate, certainly in terms of sleep staging. Sleep staging is done in a lab using electrodes on the skull, which are measuring the brainwave patterns. There is no brain in our wrist or in our finger. They are using algorithms that are putting together a whole load of data to make assumptions on what sleep stage we might be in. And while they are getting more and more accurate, they are definitely quite a long way off.
What's your general advice for average people? Most people just have a watch of some kind that might give some data. What's your thoughts about how helpful they are in that circumstance?
So I'd say evaluate the impact on yourself. If you are looking at that device and regularly thinking, oh no, I've had a bad night, then that is probably not helpful for you. And furthermore, we know from research that actually people can be given feedback about their sleep that is false, and it has an impact on how they experience their day. So this has been done in quite a few studies where people are given a wearable device, a tracker, to use for a couple of weeks, and they are asked to complete questionnaires about their mood, their performance, their functioning, essentially, how their day has gone. And then the researchers start telling group A that they've had a great night, or group B, that they've had a terrible night? And any guesses which group at the end of the day tends to have had worse performance?
Well, I'm guessing it's the ones who are told that they didn't have good sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that had quite a significant impact on not just their mood during the day, but their concentration and attention, and how they felt that they performed, just from having information that told them they hadn't slept very well.
So just being told we haven't slept well can affect our concentration, it can affect our mood, it can affect our performance at work or in our lives, whether or not actually that information is correct or not. So that highlights really the problem there with our sleep trackers, that if they're giving us information that says our sleep is bad, whether or not it's accurate, that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our concern, that it may not be accurate, and it could be making us feel worse. If you start your day feeling like you're on a bad footing, it may be a little bit harder to cope with the day. And that's probably going to have an impact on our mindset as we enter the day and go through it.
And so finally, for our choice-based takeaway, if someone wanted to make one or two small changes that might make a start to improve their sleep, even if it's not going to be the entire process, what would be one small, meaningful step that they might take today?
So for many, many people, it can be really helpful for them to maintain a consistent wake time. It doesn't have to be exact, but generally within half hour, an hour across the course of the week. And the reason being that, firstly, it primes your body clock to know when the day starts. And if it knows when the day starts, then it's going to be far better at anticipating the end of the day, upping that melatonin, getting you in a state ready to fall asleep and sleep well at night. But the other factor is it means that each day you will start to accumulate that sleep pressure at a similar time. And then by night time, you will have filled your tank ready for sleep. So trying to maintain a consistent wake time, even if you've had a bit of a rubbish night and even if it's the weekend. The other thing I'd want to come through is try not to worry about your sleep, because worry makes it worse. That doesn't mean ignore it or don't prioritize it, but certainly if you're struggling with sleep, honestly, there are solutions. There is hope, and worrying about it will make it worse. When I'm doing talks with people, I'll often get a ball out which represents that sleep disruption, and then I will start adding layers to that, which is more the worry about the sleep, the paying more attention to it, the desperately trying new things, and essentially it turns a problem that was quite small into something that looks much bigger. But only part of the problem is the sleep. The other part is the struggling. And when we realize that, sometimes we can give ourselves permission to thinking about those things or trying so hard or blaming ourselves or whatever it might be. And that helps our body to relax and make it a little easier to sleep.
I would really encourage people to let go of expectations based on what other people's amount of sleep they say they're getting or they think they need, and actually focus on what do I need really? And that doesn't mean what would I get on my best ever night. It means what can I consistently cope with, and actually let go of that pressure to live up to something which is perhaps unrealistic and is actually making it harder to sleep, not easier. And I would go back to also reinforcing the idea about screens and just making them workable for us. So not demonizing them, but also recognizing what role is it playing? What do I need to let go of, and what could help me? What do I need to create a boundary around that might be contributing? So I would often say a boundary around scrolling on social media or the news. Very rarely in my experience helps people with their sleep, but maybe something more relaxing, an audio book, a program that helps your brain switch off from the day can be really positive. So I think it's knowing yourself. Thank you so much. It's been really great having you on the podcast, really insightful. And I think we've all learned a lot about sleep.
Thank you, Lee. I've really enjoyed being here, and I hope it will be a helpful episode for people because, as I said, there is hope, I promise, and there are solutions.
I love that. Thank you for listening to the Choice Space podcast. I hope this conversation has offered a little more room to pause, breathe, and find your own way forward. We've linked the ways that you can connect with Louise in the show notes. If today's episode has been helpful, please download, follow, and share with someone else who might find it helpful as well. I'd love to have you with me for the next episode. Until then, take care and keep making space for what matters most.